how do you know your back testing is legitimate, Christoph? Now, I don't know if you're asking, how do we know ours is? Or whether you're asking, how do you know when you're doing testing? So I'll answer the first one. How do we know? Well, as a community, especially in our trading rooms, is a lot of the time what will happen is if a student's done back testing, I will look at it and check it. If Kerry and I are working on something together, then we'll check each other's. We'll take random data samples from different years and check that. Now, that's not completely foolproof, but we will check each other's data. And then lastly, we will, and this is really the good mechanism, is that whatever backtesting data you've got, you assume at least 20 to 30% worse than the figures you're getting. So if you're getting 100% return over a year, I would assume 70% over a year and a half. So I would essentially increase the time, decrease the profit. So I, by default, never look at what I've got on paper that way. And I was actually replying to a message to one of our Kickstarters from January, Matt, and I was saying this in his example is you want to make sure that you look at whatever you've got in front of you, take a big picture view, but also look at where the worst case scenario is. So take a big picture view, take some of the data off and look at worst case scenario. So if you're asking the question to yourself, how do I know your back testing is legitimate? You don't. So the only thing I would suggest is if you know somebody that back tests and they're good at it and they understand what you're doing, get them to do a data check. So get them, if you've got 100 tests, get them to take 20 at random and check the validity of them. Get somebody else to look over it, but only get somebody that understands what you're doing and understands the process you're going. If you're with us and you're working with us in our trading room, then that can happen. That could be me, that could be Kerry, that could be Martin, it could be multiple people within that process that do that. As I've said, you don't assume your back testing is legitimate, so take a percentage off and increase the time for the scenario. And then lastly, this isn't really part of your question, but I think this is really important. And it's something I've been talking about in the room in a lot of detail, but I want to just show you this. I'm just going to back the chart back up because I think this will be really useful. So one of the things that I say to my guys is this: there's two factors that whenever you've got your testing results, assume that you've biased it, they're biased, assume that there's a bias to what you've done. So they're probably better than they actually will be. And then two things that most traders don't do. Traders will look at something like the return and say, flipping out, this looks good. It's got 100% return in a year. But then they will automatically expect every month to deliver 5, 6, 7%. Well, what they don't tend to do is look at the averages. And also what they don't do is look at the worst performing periods. So there's two key phrases to look at. Longest losing run. So what's the longest losing run? If the longest losing run is 4, then assume you're going to hit 6. The longest losing run is 6, assume you're going to hit 8. And then worst performing period. Now the worst performing period can include winners, but work out what the worst performing period is. And if there's 2 months that is, I don't know, a 2-month period, you were unprofitable and you ended up at one point during that month down those 2 months down -4. And by the end of those 2 months, you were down -2, then assume a little bit worse, -6, -4. And what that does is that prepares you for what we call the price you'll have to pay to deliver that 100%. So this is something I work on with all my traders in the trading room, is I say, isn't it great that we can run a trailing stop on oil, but how many more losers or break-even trades are we going to have to turn an 800% return in 16 years to a 4,000? Because there's nearly always going to be a price that you have to pay. So I hope that helps, Christoph. So just assume that there is an element of illegitimateness to your back testing. There's going to be bias, and you're probably going to have more winning trades than the reality. 2 reasons. One, skill, because trading real time versus back testing is harder to do. And secondly, when you're back testing, there's a tendency for you to seek out the trades that prove what it is you're looking for and sometimes miss the losers. I often get my guys, once they finish their back testing, to go away, take a break from it, and then go away and force themselves to try and find more losers. All right. Good. So that is the questions. I'm going to come to the comments because I can see a few comments